I'd like to welcome you to the 9th Annual GIS Day here at the Library of Congress. Our theme today is GIS in K through 12, from data to STEM. So I hope you all are ready for a really, really excellent program. We've got speakers from AAG, ESRI, our very own Library of Congress, and we also have Congressman Westerman, who will be here at approximately 10 o'clock to talk a little bit about the Spatial Data Act that was just passed a couple of weeks ago. I want to thank everyone who is here to support us and those who supported us from the Geography and Map staff, the Library of Congress staff, and all the folks that I've mentioned who are going to be the speakers today. We do appreciate your support for GIS Day, and we appreciate all that you do to support us. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. John Hessler, who is our geospatial specialist in Geography and Map, and he's going to set the stage for today's activity. Thank you again, and have a good GIS Day.
Thank you, Paulette, and I'll say again, thank you everyone for coming. As Paulette mentioned, this is the 9th Annual GIS Day at the Library of Congress, and GIS has come a long, long way here in those 9 years. For those not familiar with it, GIS really started about 20 years ago here at the library with a single license in a single office down in G&M with the man Gary Fitzpatrick, who did a lot of work and a lot of mapping and tried to kind of get it all off the ground. It went through a lot of different incarnations to get to where it is today. Just a few years ago, it was only a few single licenses being used by the Congressional Cartography Project and some analysts in CRS. Today, it is the geospatial hosting environment. The geospatial hosting environment is a series of portals. We collect terabytes of geospatial data. We have hundreds of users, all of which come from either across the street, the Senate, the House members, CRS analysts, Geography and Maps, Congressional Cartography Project, and even curators with the new Story Maps project that we began publishing collections and things like that here at the library. There are some people in the crowd who have been responsible for this growth. I see Mike Handy, retired many years ago, was part of our IT team here, who is one of the most responsible people for building what is the geospatial hosting environment here at the library and kind of pushing it through the 6th floor. We have our engineering team in the back, Bibi, who was one of the research and development heads who worked this through during the last few years. And then we have our engineering team, basically known as Butch and the Two Mics. Yes, and they do have a band. Plays hits from Python and JSON. And that would be Butch Lazarak, Mike Sholin, who's sitting back there, and Mike Bijou, who's also in the back. All of whom played a big role in getting GIS to where it is in the library. It's growing rapidly. Our new chief, Paulette Hazer, has been responsible for pushing the cloud-based online story map program and moving that forward at a sort of light speed. We've now published a whole series of those. Curators from across the library are using them. There is training being done, and so the program is moving rapidly. But if it was just data and software, it really wouldn't mean much. It's more than that. It's about getting the staff in the Congress. It's about getting the staff in CRS. It's about getting people in G&M and curators all over the library to use their imagination and their creativity, to understand how to use these tools in order to foster what their ideas are, analysis, looking at things from a spatial perspective. And so today we're going to settle on that. Spatial thinking, spatial activity. What can it tell us about the world? What can it tell us about what we are? And so the talks that we're going to see today are going to focus on K through 12 education. And that's very important because when we think about GIS, when we think about where geography has come as a discipline in the last 20 to 30 years, it's gone through a revolution. And that revolution has allowed the field to begin to think of things in ways that it never did before. It's allowed it to combine humanistic thinking, critical thinking, with scientific analysis. It's allowed it to come to terms with things, the way human beings interact with the environment, the way they interact with themselves, the way we interact with each other in a spatial way. It's given us the tools to begin thinking deeply about those problems and about the way we live in society. And that's an extremely important thing. To a certain extent, cartography has always been about this. It's always been about imagination. It's always been about visualization. It's always been about spatial thinking. One can think back to the 2nd century AD, where Ptolemy is sitting in Alexandria staring out at the Mediterranean Sea, trying to figure out a way in order to map the world, to visualize the world. We can think of Francois Minard, the great French cartographer, who is sitting in his study in Paris, trying to figure out what can space add to my analysis of transatlantic trade? How can I visualize this? And coming up with radical ways of doing it. Or it can be a group of hipsters sitting in a bar, wondering how, in God's name, can we map in 3 dimensions the lives of squirrels? So it can be a lot of different things. And all of those things that I've just said, the squirrels, the Ptolemy, and the Menard, if you come to the open house, you'll be able to see all of those maps because we've selected those. And so when we start thinking about what GIS is, and when we start thinking about how it can influence people in K through 12 education, and I especially want to thank any of the teachers who are here today, because it's in your hands that these developments are going to be thrust. The kids coming up today, the children coming up today, are going to have tools that can be used for good or, in fact, for not so good. And getting them to use them for good, getting them to understand the excitement of doing an analysis that might squeeze a little bit more food yield out of a landscape to feed people, to help people distribute limited water resources, and to understand, well, maybe even squirrels, is something that we can start with very early and very simply. The data that we now have and the tools that we now have can be brought down to the level of K through 12 students in a way that we never could before. The excitement of a child mapping a squirrel in a park, interacting with the data, the computers, and with the world. It's that triangle that K through 12 builds in students. And it's that triangle that's very important. And it's that triangle that we're going to explore in our talks today. And so I want to bring up Tim Saint-Onge, who's going to be the host and the introducer and the master of ceremonies for the rest of the conference. And again, I want to thank you for coming, and especially the teachers. We're here for you. Thanks.
All right, thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. As John said, my name's Tim Saint-Onge. I'm with the Geography and Map Division here at the library, and I'm going to be the moderator or so this morning, keeping us on schedule. So first, I'm going to be introducing our first speaker, who is Kathy Hart. Kathy is the head of the Geography and Map Division's reference team and reading room here at the Library of Congress. She leads a team that facilitates the use of maps, atlases, and geographic materials in the library's extensive worldwide collection of maps. Throughout her career, Kathy has promoted the use and understanding of maps and geographic information, as well as delving into spatial thinking and maps and GIS in the digital humanities. She is a recent addition to the Library of Congress after spending 20 years in academic libraries. So please welcome Kathy Hart.
All right, well, happy GIS Day. So I am here, as you just heard, I'm here to talk about spatial thinking. But before I do that, I want to talk about maps. So when was the last time that you looked closely at a map? I mean, really dug in and read it to uncover the meaning behind the lines, colors, and symbols. Did it all make sense? Did you understand the intent of the map? Did you examine the legend and the text to help you with the overall meaning of the map? Did you understand the main concepts, the cartographer's intent? The same question can be asked regarding digital geographic maps, or GIS, as well. Did you move through those locations, zoom in and out, understand the layers and ability to select those layers that were of most interest to you? Okay, so great, you are a spatial thinker. So I do want to talk about how you make meaning from those lines, colors, and symbols on the maps and GIS sites. What happens at the cognitive level? And what can we do to enhance the spatial thinking and spatial understanding skills, including in the schools with our K through 12 students? So why do we care, and why are we talking about this today? Well, spatial thinking underpins the map reading, the map interpretation, map creation. It helps our K through 12 students succeed in their classes as well as their careers. Spatial thinking correlates with success in math and science, and as therefore students with the strong spatial thinking skills are at an advantage in their coursework and their later career options. So it follows that instructional resources for spatial thinking are critical in the early years. The good news is that there's been a great deal of interest and research on spatial thinking and enhancing spatial-related curriculum. Much of the research includes a digital component, including teaching GIS in schools. So what I hope to do in my time this morning is to create for you the conceptual connections between spatial thinking and map reading and the use of maps and 3D models and learning GIS and related digital environments. How these can expand a student's spatial habits of mind, which then increases spatial awareness and spatial skills. Beyond K through 12, in our everyday lives, it's important to think spatially in that it helps us to be informed citizens. So a few fields of studies and careers, these should be familiar to you. There's probably others that I don't have listed, but this is just to kind of get you thinking about the variety, so many things that are touched by spatial thinking as far as fields of study and careers. And I'm sure there's some that I missed, but you can fill in the blank on others. So the types of spatial relationships, it's important to understand the range from the simple to the more complex. And it's important when we're looking at maps and GIS to use precise terminology. So we're talking about, where things are located, the distance between two things. Is there movement? Where are the boundaries? Is there a region? Is something adjacent to something else? Is something enclosed or within? So again, these are terms that when you're looking at maps and using GIS, these are the kinds of things that you're trying to uncover. And then you go into the more complex spatial relationships. What are the patterns? How are things distributed? Are there dispersion? Is there clustering involved? So as you look at maps and GIS, again, these are the types of things you're trying to understand. At the younger ages, at the very youngest ages, children come to understand the basic topological spatial concepts such as on, in, with, close to, next to, beside, over and inside. They understand these just in everyday life and when they're learning their vocabulary. At around 6 to 8 years old, children progress to more complex projective understanding, such as in front of, left of, right of, on the side, beside, behind, straight, and up the hill and down the hill. And this image that you're looking at here is just kind of a way to understand what those concepts mean when you're looking at a map. So we're talking about verbal as well as visual skills, spatial skills. But it's not all work. There's also play involved. And while most children pick up these concepts naturally, some do struggle. But it comes, as I mentioned, it comes informally in daily life as part of the acquisition of vocabulary, as well as more formally in classroom activities and focused curriculum. But think about the common toys at this age. Much of the playtime involves spatial thinking. So you have building blocks, you have cars and trucks, you have doll houses, Legos, and Rubik's Cubes. These objects can be arranged and rearranged using the child's native spatial awareness and the inborn creativity. Numerous digital games also use spatial abilities. Minecraft is one that comes to mind, but there are many others. So this is all, again, in the kind of the younger ages, but around grades 5 and 6. The more abstract or the Euclidean understandings emerge, as does curriculum, on using a frame of reference, such as how to measure distances and direction, and using a coordinate system. So how many of you have seen these maps, right? So the children are asked to make a map of a place they know. Basically, how do you get from your home to school? And so this is really good practice because some elementary age children may have difficulty understanding maps. So practice with things they know is a very important point for them to kind of bring that understanding. So their drawings, their maps typically include their house, maybe a curvy line representing the street, and the school building. And it's not to scale. The perspective, the angle or vantage point is from an on-the-ground perspective, so street view rather than from above, as we know typically use maps. The children understand one key aspect of map reading and map creation, that's self-location. So the self-location is the ability to relate where you are in the real world to a place on the map. And they do that by drawing and viewing it. So these two examples show some fairly complex and sophisticated thinking going on. They also show two other spatial abilities, and that's route memory and map rotation. Route memory is the ability to remember the way to and from a place. And map rotation is the ability to mentally rotate a map while you are making turns without physically turning a map. So you don't have to raise your hand if you actually still do the turning of the map. It's okay. We can work on that. But these two maps illustrate all these concepts really well, and kudos to the students that created these. Now, I don't know the gender of these two who created these, and if there's any teachers in the room, you may have an idea. Maybe the one on the left might be a girl, and maybe the one on the right might be a boy. And I want to bring that up because there are some sex differences. There are studies that show that males perform slightly better, on spatial tests, such as with mental rotation tasks and wayfinding. And explanations as to the reason for these differences vary, and some relate to the environment in the home. For instance, in one study, there were no gender differences found in children from lower-income homes. However, there were gender differences found in children from the middle and higher income groups. So I will give you a second to think about why that might be. So it may be due to their home environment, right? So I'm happy, though, to report that whatever differences there may be due to biology or individual differences or economic circumstances, these are easily remedied by instruction and increasing access to spatial-related activities. So my message to parents and grandparents, give your girls and kids Legos, building blocks. Teachers, encourage all of your students to engage in spatial play activities in the classroom, especially those who may not have the opportunity at home. So moving a little bit more into the map reading and GIS, there's a lot of standard methods that have been developed over the years, so with map design. And that really helps everyone so that when we go to read something, we have a common vocabulary, common language. And Jacques Bertin developed frameworks or visual variables as guides to map design. And these are the concepts which I hope you can see in the back of position, size, shape, the value or lightness, the color or hue, an orientation, which may also be called direction, and texture, so as you can see in this chart. So these concepts extend to GIS as well. And I can just point out Axis Map prepared this particular chart, and there's a lot of description on their website as well. So the point is, when you're reading a map or creating a GIS, it's important to understand the theoretical background and sometimes complexity to the symbology. This is just a small part to a much larger topic. And I should also point out that these concepts can be combined. So you may have color and shape that are combined, and we understand that when we're looking at maps. And this applies to points, lines, and polygons. So again, these are kind of the building blocks to how we put maps together. And as I mentioned earlier, the spatial thinking, it's a combination of cognitive skills comprised of knowing concepts of space, using tools of representation, and applying processes of reasoning. But we're seeing now a recent study that suggests a correlation between thinking spatially and thinking geographically. And I'll just read off this section from this article from Metoyer and Bednarz. Geographic thinking extrapolates beyond spatial thinking to encompass the recognition and elaboration of the relations among spatial concepts, the advanced associations derived from these concepts, and the formal linking of the associations into theories and generalizations. So again, spatial thinking is the building block. You add the geographic concepts, and then you get into the geographic thinking. So again, maps and GIS. And when we talk about geography, going into the geographic realm, I hope some of you, if not maybe all of you, are aware of Tobler's first law of geography. Everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. So think about that. What does that mean? So things are nearby, they're somewhat dependent. So you have tree species that are more similar to the trees that are in their neighborhood than maybe trees across the country or in another continent, another climate. Any kind of species, animals, plants, but also demographic and social issues. There you have similarities in things that are near. You have more similarity things that are near rather than far away. So we can keep that in mind also when you're looking at maps and GIS, what's going on in that place as compared to what's going on farther away. And getting into why is geographic thinking important? It's important because then we have the whys of where. Where things happen is critical to knowing how and why they happen. So we want to study maps, GIS, we want to study geographic concepts and do studies because then we will know how and why things are happening. We can plan, we can do all sorts of analysis and really understand our world in a much better way. So I want to circle back to what I mentioned at the beginning. We know that spatial thinking is very important for success in STEM, and we understand that skills are based both on innate abilities as well as environmental inputs. So it follows that we must look at the important role of teachers. The skills of STEM and non-STEM teachers are important, and it's not surprising that studies have found that secondary STEM teachers have strong spatial skills as compared to non-STEM teachers and the general population, as well as when compared to preschool and primary school teachers. So what this means is that our high school chemistry, physics, and calculus teachers are much stronger in spatial thinking. Obviously, that's a good thing. However, since spatial skill development is formative in the primary school years, we are reliant on our primary school teachers' spatial skills to foster that strong spatial skills at the younger ages. Workshops and professional development for the primary school teachers has been shown to increase their confidence and abilities to teach spatial content. And I'll point you to a few articles. These first two, Nora Newcomb, who wrote in American Educator, really has a great introduction to this topic. And then Learning to Think Spatially, GIS as Support System in the K-12 Curriculum from the National Research Council. That's a very robust and in-depth report. I also encourage you to read that. So I hope I've established the whys and wherefores of spatial thinking. But what does this have to do with libraries, you may ask? Well, let me tell you. Librarians are partnering with K-12 educators to develop geographic and spatial curriculum. I have the third and fourth articles here are examples of that. In Colorado, Theobald and Vrbanchik have engaged with K-12 educators and school librarians with great success, as well as in Florida, McAuliffe using aerial photos in the University of Florida Library partnered with teachers to enhance the National Geography Standards Geography for Life. So libraries are engaged in information resources and information literacy of all formats. And maps and GIS are among those reliant on spatial thinking, so it's incumbent upon us to develop geospatial information literacy programs. So stay tuned, as they say. So as I wind down, I will encourage you to think spatially, observe spatial relationships in your everyday life, think critically about maps and the information that they convey, use precise terminology to describe spatial phenomenon, and bring these concepts into your instruction and collaborations. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk, and I believe, again, we have more discussion coming up. I think we're going to hold questions till the end, and I do want to put also another plug for the open house in the Geography and Map Division from 1 to 3 p.m. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. So as Kathy mentioned, for the design of our morning session, let's see here. Basically, we're going to be having a question session for all of our speakers at 11:45, so that the idea is that we have basically a morning's worth of learning about GIS, spatial thinking, and that will bring all that knowledge in, all the questions and thoughts that are sort of popping in your head. At 11:45, we'll have all the speakers of this morning up, and we'll be able to answer, we'll be able to have more of a cohesive or full discussion about all the different topics that we've been talking about this morning. So thank you again, Kathy. So coming up next, we will be having our keynote speaker, Congressman Bruce Westerman of Arkansas. And he will be speaking about the Geospatial Data Act, education and policy. Since we are ahead of schedule, he will be coming before too long. So in the meantime, we wanted to bring up John Wertman from Esri. He is graciously going to provide a little bit of an introduction, a little bit of a background on the Geospatial Data Act, which will be the subject of Congressman Westerman's talk. So without further ado, I'll bring up John Wertman.
Well, thanks very much, Tim. So I wanted to give a little bit of a background to sort of set the story for what you're going to hear from the Congressman. About 5 or 6 years ago, there was a movement on the Senate side to put together a foundational bill for how Congress and the federal government deal with geospatial data. There was previously a bill passed called the Data Act, which dealt with sort of data broadly. And I see that the Congressman's here now, so I'll sort of wrap this up. But essentially, the bill was enacted as part of the FAA compromise that passed a few weeks ago, and we're delighted to have it in place. And I'll turn it over to Tim to introduce the Congressman.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. All right. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning. Congressman Bruce Westerman, representing the 4th District of Arkansas. He is a member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and on the Committee on Natural Resources. He's an engineer and forester by trade. Westerman has worked for 22 years at Mid-South Engineering in Hot Springs. He was named Engineer of the Year by the Arkansas Society of Professional Engineers in 2013. So without further ado, I welcome Congressman Bruce Westerman.
Well, good morning, everyone. I think it's still morning. One of those days. This is a good day. We should all be happy about what's happened. It's strange how Washington, D.C. works. I've worked on legislation. I've been in Congress for 4 years. I've got bills that I've worked on tirelessly since I've been here, and worked on this bill very hard. And all of a sudden, we found a vehicle to get it in the FAA bill, and like that, almost, it became law. So sometimes, as we say in Arkansas, a blind hog finds an acorn, and we found one on this bill. And I'm thrilled about that. At the end of the day, we want to see results, and we were able to get results. And much of that's due to the support that this group had for the Geospatial Data Act and your efforts, and really not just in lobbying for the bill and contacting members and trying to get it to pass, but the work that we all did coming to an agreement on what should be in the bill. And I say thank you to everyone who participated in that. As was mentioned when I was introduced, my background is in engineering and forestry, so it's two areas where geospatial data is used quite extensively. But I was thinking about my engineering background, and I was partner in a consulting engineering firm, and we had to have standards in our business. And like many businesses that want to be successful, it makes good sense. It makes your business work more efficiently and more effectively if you have good standards. We had standards and specifications. We had certain things that we knew were going to be purchased many times over. It wasn't rocket science. We'd gone through the design, we'd gone through the analysis, and we could write standards and standard specifications so that when it came time to use these services or these materials again on a job, that was all taken care of. In our drawings, I'm old enough that I learned drafting in college doing it with on a drawing board. And it's amazing things you learn when you're doing it by hand that actually translate into doing it digitally. When you're drawing on paper, you change your line weight by using a different pencil. You do it by the amount of pressure you put on it. And we had to have standards even when we were drawing by hand. Really, it was almost more important when we were drawing by hand because it was so time-consuming and laborious to make a drawing that you wanted to have certain drawings that you could use over and over. It's just a little example of what standardization does to make things work more efficiently. We, as you all know, have an issue in the federal government where we were being very duplicative. We had different agencies using different standards, different platforms and formats, and there was a lot of taxpayer dollars going to produce geospatial data that wasn't being or wasn't in a way that it could easily be shared among agencies, and I'm not sure the agencies were even communicating to know, if one agency had this data that another agency could possibly use. So that was the driver behind doing this bill. I was fortunate. We got a very strong geospatial data program in Arkansas. The state director of that, Shelby Johnson, has been a longtime friend of mine. Back when I was just doing engineering work before I ever got into politics, I worked with Shelby at the, they called it CAS, the Center for Advanced Spatial Technologies at the University of Arkansas, where my undergraduate degree is from. And worked with Shelby there and learned more and more about geospatial data systems. I went to forestry school at Yale about the time when foresters were really starting to use satellite imagery and remote sensing technologies, and the amount of time that you can save and really the ceiling is still way up there on the advancements we can make in understanding our natural environment using remote sensing technologies. But I got to kind of come in the early stages of that, and was able to use that in my business to make better decisions and help the clients that we were serving. So I've kind of got a working knowledge of GIS and the many ways that it affects our lives, much more than what was used in my engineering business. And I know that the way technology is advancing, that remote sensing and GIS and spatial data is going to be a more and more important part of our lives. I know that as an engineer, if I went into an existing facility and we wanted to make modernization to that facility, we would spend days, if not weeks, taking hand measurements, making sketches, going back and putting those sketches into a drawing so that we would know what was there before we got started. I'm sure, and this is what happens when you get into Congress, you kind of get out of touch with the details that you used to like to stay so close to. But I know there were sensing technologies where you could go inside an existing facility using something like LiDAR and measure everything in there from different places and put it all together in a 3D drawing. And you can probably do that very cost effectively now, and some of you may know all about how to do that. But there's just, like I said, the sky's the limit on where we can go with geospatial data. And this bill, I think, is a very good start in getting standards across the federal government, which will probably affect many things outside of the federal government. I got to say thank you to Senator Hatch, who was the Senate sponsor on this bill and worked so hard to get it included in the FAA bill. When I'm on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I'm on the Aviation Subcommittee, and had you asked me this time last year about getting the Geospatial Data Act as part of the FAA bill, I would have just given you a strange look. But that's kind of the way things happen here. And I'm excited about where the future will take us. As you all know, what this bill did was basically codified some things in that the OMB had already put out. It's codified the Federal Geographic Data Committee and also codified the National Geospatial Advisory Committee. It defined the geospatial data infrastructure. It talks about data themes, and from there how to develop standards. It talks about geo platform, and then it gets into the covered agency responsibilities. One of the hurdles we had to get through in this was with the Defense Department and intelligence groups. They didn't necessarily want to share their data across platforms, which is understandable, so we carved out exemptions for them. But the rest of our agencies, hopefully as we move forward, we'll see much easier, seamless transition between sharing data across agencies. And I'm hoping that the oversight that we established in this bill will get more agencies talking and sharing data, and also making that data more available for the public. So we don't get to celebrate that often in Washington, D.C. about a big win like this, but this really is a big win that happened in an unexpected way. And again, I want to say thank you for all the work that you put into it, and it's just an honor for me to get to be part of it. And you know, this isn't going to be people actually have not even heard of the Geospatial Data Act. They just know we passed an FAA bill. And you know, I go home to my constituents and they say, well, what have you done? I say, well, we got this Geospatial Data Act passed. And they look at me like, that's what we elected you to Congress to do? I say, well, it actually affects a lot of your life. I said, if you use, on those smartphones you got, you pull up a map program, I say, that's geospatial data. I said, the weather that you look at every day, I said, there's just tons of ways that geospatial data affects your life. And we did something to streamline that process and make it more user-friendly and hopefully make life better for more Americans. It's not the sexiest thing in the world, but I'm glad to be, as a fellow nerd, I'm glad to be part of the cause. And again, appreciate your support. Do we have time for a few questions? As long as they're easy questions, I'll take all of them. Well, those are really easy questions. Yes, ma'am.
So, do you see, when the standards are developed, do you see this impacting education at all?
I would hope so. I mean,
How would you foresee that?
so I can give you a little bit of a practical answer to that. Back in my high school days, I had a friend who went to West Point, and he just retired. He'd gone back to West Point as an instructor, and he was teaching a geospatial data class up there. So I went up to visit the academy and visit his class, And the students were very interested in this bill and this legislation. And I already know that what we were talking about in this bill was being carried over into a class of future geospatial data scientists. And as the federal government moves in a way to standardize, I think a natural process would be for that to move into higher education and be implemented in the classroom.
I'm assuming, I know that they do have their own sets of standards. However, I'm wondering if the Geospatial Act also addressed them setting across the board standards, and that should the event need, they can declassify some of that information and have it standardized so that it can be shared in public, say for a national emergency or something like that.
Now, somebody might be able to correct me on this that knows more about the weeds of the dealings with defense and intelligence, but my understanding and my feedback was basically that if we left the Defense Department and NSA in the bill, then it was going to get a lot of pushback. And so we kind of just left them alone to do their own thing. Now, whether they eventually will declassify information, I think that will be their decision on whether they declassify or what of their data they make available and what kind of standards they use. But
I'm just wondering whether or not that they're, they would want to be able to develop standards that would mesh very well if they need to declassify.
yeah, you would think they would want to do that, but we pretty much left them alone and able to get the bill enacted as it is.
Do you have any plans for expanded use of GIS in your office?
Whether I have plans or not, I think GIS is going to be expanded. I think it's definitely, I don't think it's a mature technology yet. I know there's tremendous amounts of use for GIS, and we'll see more and more of that. As much as it's, forestry was one of the early adapters of GIS technology, and there's still a tremendous amount of work that can be done in forestry in an area that I've got some expertise in. And as you look at all the other uses, it's pretty amazing. I had a fascinating conversation with National Geographic, it's been within the last 2 years, and they were talking about all the mapping that they're doing, the different kinds of mapping, and it just makes your head spin to think that there's that much data out there and all the analysis we can do with it. And I think it could actually affect policy, because you would hope that lawmakers are looking at the data that's available to make the most informed decision, and if you can get better data in a more real-time situation, then you can make better decisions. I was just looking at a map on wildland-urban interfaces this morning, which is all geospatial data with the wildfires that are happening out in California, and we're seeing more and more with warming temperatures and drier conditions, and more people moving into the WUI, as we call it, wildland-urban interface. I think we're going to have to make some definite policy changes and have some leadership in the federal government to address that problem, and GIS will be critical in doing that. So it's everywhere. It affects all parts of our lives. People just, I don't think the general public realizes that, how much they actually use it. Yeah, you would think so. I know I served in my state legislature, and I was there in 2012, which after the 2010 census, and part of the state legislature's duty was to draw congressional districts. I was in the minority, and I had no say in how my congressional district was actually drawn at the time. But it was fascinating to me, the tools that were available in 2012 to take data by precincts and you could draw your own maps and get real creative. And I know that technology's increased even more. So yeah, it'll definitely be used in census data.
So you mentioned the disparity between standards and what was being published in geospatial data environment. You talked a little bit about your background as an engineer and also the importance in forestry, but why was this bill so important to you? Why did you champion it?
Well, I like to see things work efficiently and effectively, and I understand the importance of standards and common platforms. And I've seen the success in Arkansas with our GIS department there and the leadership that Shelby's been able to bring to that. And I just thought there's a better way to do government at the federal level, and this is a good governance bill that should save taxpayers dollars and provide a better service. So it was easy for me to get on board to support it. I wish we could find more pieces of legislation like this.
So at least off your final point, I was just curious if, sort of looking ahead, if there are more types of bills or more types of initiatives that you might be jumping onto that might relate more additionally to geospatial education or promoting geospatial technology development in the government or beyond.
Yeah, and I think we need to give this piece of legislation time to get implemented, and there'll always be tweaks that need to be made. I'm also a huge proponent of STEM education, which geospatial data education would fall in that STEM category. You know, I have 4 children, one still in high school, and they all got a little bit of exposure to geospatial data in a program called EAST that actually originated in Arkansas. And I see programs like that continuing to grow, and it's amazing when the interest it can create in young people who may have never thought about a career in STEM when they get to start playing around with satellite data and remote sensing and building their own maps and doing projects with that. So I think it will, I think the educational component will come along to support the science and the industry.
What's the timeline expected for getting all of the government agencies on the same page as far as the standards go? And are there going to be tools to help you do that?
I don't know if an official timeline has been established yet, but you know, my response to the agencies would be, "You're not done yet." You know, and you all know, and this is a hard thing when you know, we have huge issues in the world today with cybersecurity, which GIS also can play a part in cybersecurity. But one problem with trying to legislate and regulate anything that has to do with technology, and especially with computer systems, is that by the time government gets the big, massive, slow machinery moving and gets momentum, everything's changed. So it's got to be something that's responsive. That's why I hope that these 2 committees that have been codified will work closely together to monitor the situation and to build something that can react at the same speed that technology changes today, if that's at all possible in the federal government. I think that's a huge challenge, and we all know how slow the federal government moves on things. But this is one that it really needs to have a bigger flame built under it, I guess, to move faster. And that's one thing that I will keep pushing for, is following up with, you know, most of this falls under the Department of Interior. So we have a lot of contacts over there that we'll be following up with to say, where are you at on this? How can we help? And you know, what's your timeline, kind of thing. But I think you all can help with that too. Just because we've got a bill signed into law doesn't mean that anything's happened yet. We've got to get the code written and get the agencies to implement the law. Well, again, thank you for your time, and I can't say enough how humbled I am to get to be the person that got to carry this piece of legislation. Will make nerds proud everywhere, and it's really, really, I can't express enough how much your work and efforts helped to get this done. Without your work and efforts, we wouldn't get to celebrate today the fact that we got the Spatial Data Act signed into law. So again, thank you, and if I can ever help you with anything else, I'm pretty easy to find. God bless y'all and have a good day.
Thank you again, Congressman Westerman, for that excellent keynote talk. So next up, I'd like to introduce Candace Lubering. Candace is a senior researcher and senior research geographer and director of outreach and engagement at the American Association of Geographers. She's the program coordinator for the AAG Esri GeoMentors program and assists with a variety of AAG projects and programs that include research, outreach, and membership engagement activities. She is a proudly self-labeled map nerd who loves promoting and sharing geography and GIS with all audiences. She's also an avid tea drinker, bike rider, and map hoarder, owning more vintage atlases than articles of clothing. So please welcome Candace.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me here. Thank you to the Library of Congress for putting this on, John Hessler, Tim, all of your colleagues for having me. First time following a congressman speaking? That's a little nerve-wracking, I'm not gonna lie. But I'm really excited to be here in particular because the focus today is on GIS in K-12 education, and that's what our GeoMentors program is all about. The GeoMentors program is a nationwide network of volunteers who are looking to do that, find ways to insert GIS and geography and spatial thinking any way we can into K-12 classrooms and student groups across the country. So that's what I'll be talking about today. So the AAG is partnered with Esri for the GeoMentors program, and this was born out of starting in 2015 for the GeoMentors program. Esri made a fantastic donation saying, hey, we've got this software platform. We will give it to any K-12 school in the U.S. that wants it and wants to use it, which is fantastic. And even now, they've expanded that donation. And Charlie, who will speak after me, will have a lot more to say about this. But now it's also available to all K-12 schools internationally as well. So this is fantastic, right? Students have the opportunity to map with the same software that industry and government and businesses are using around the world, which is great. But we can't always just, of course, take software and drop it in the laps of K-12 schools because they have tons of time, right, to learn new technology or find a way to insert this in curriculum. No, so, Esri had the foresight of thinking, yeah, this is a great gift, but we know it's not going to be the easiest thing to implement. So with the free software bundle, let's also bundle in some free help. And that's the idea of having this GeoMentors network. Volunteers who will work with a teacher, with a classroom, with a school district, asking them what they would like to do with this technology, kind of teaching them about the technology, and helping them implement it in the classroom. So there's the best chance for this software gift to actually get used. Our current GeoMentors network, as of yesterday, was 1,814 people who have signed up. So every dot on this map is someone who is basically another geo nerd who's like, yeah, I want to help get kids mapping. Who doesn't? So they're available. This is an interactive map, so any teachers in the room, you can go on here, click on this, learn about people, find their contact information. We also have a database so you can search keywords if you have certain topics you're teaching. But these are all people who are interested, ready, and willing to work with a teacher or with a youth group or something like that. So teachers, again, see these points as resources for you, and those of you potential GeoMentors, consider adding your dot to the map. So this is a lot of volunteers, which is great. But if you think of how many schools and classrooms there are to reach, we could always use a few more good people helping us out. So then your next thought might be, well, who can be a GeoMentor? I run into so many people thinking, can I be a GeoMentor? If you're asking yourself, if you're here on GIS Day, if you know what GIS Day is, you're already super qualified to be a GeoMentor. And I'm not saying that it's because, you don't have to be an absolute whiz. You're not going to go in a classroom and they expect you to, I would need you to Python program to do this. No, right? So I have a lot of people who get intimidated and realize and think, I can't do it. You have so much more to offer than you think. If you know what GIS is, if you know of a cool web map and can lead a class through asking questions that can be answered spatially by looking at imagery or adding different data layers, that's being a great GeoMentor. So if you're here, it's more the enthusiasm and the passion that's a prerequisite than a certain type or level of skills. So we're not just academics, we're not just GISPs, we're not just geographers. So it's anyone from undergrads, they're some of our most enthusiastic volunteers, to retirees and everyone in between from all different disciplines are our GeoMentors. So don't be intimidated and think you don't know enough to be a volunteer. And you can really see the diversity of our volunteers by seeing just some of the descriptions of who they are. Again, not just geographers, not just in academics or something like that. So a biologist with the National Park Service. A teacher is also a GeoMentor. So you have teachers who are using this in the classroom and then they're helping get other teachers to use it. Undergrad students, really, they are fantastic and enthusiastic and wonderful as volunteers because they're not far removed from the K-12 environment. So they have the connections to get into classrooms, but they also remember that experience and how they want to make it better. A GIS tech at an engineering firm, urban planners, a health educator who also has a certification in GIS. I like that, right? Talk about diversifying your skill set in your portfolio. So what's good about this is not just that it's interesting, but we don't go into a school and have a prescription of, what are you, your 8th grade? All right, do this. We know it would never work. What our job really is to listen. What would you like to do with this? What are you currently teaching and how can I help you apply that? And if you imagine all the different teachers in schools across the country all have very different interests with what they're teaching, with what's important in their local area. So we need this broad spectrum of volunteers to be able to respond to this, to have varying expertise and interests, to have be able to respond to their needs and cater to them and what's going to be important and useful for them in using the technology. All right, so who are they? We cover that. What exactly do you do? All right, that was the next thing, right? You're asking me to sign up for something, so volunteers, what do you do? Not the easiest answer again, because we don't have a playbook that you take, right? So really the opportunities, I often call this a choose your own adventure volunteer opportunity, because it really is. You're responding to what a teacher or school or a student working on a project might have. So it's kind of as broad as the applications of GIS itself, so but the general areas of what a lot of our volunteers do are kind of fall in 4 areas. One, advocating for using GIS. So for most of us in this room, check, right? We are like, we know GIS is important. That assumption actually does not carry super far sometimes outside of this room or this building or even agencies around here. I think even hearing about the congressman making the case of the Spatial Data Act, right, to his constituents, right? Unfortunately, people use and interact with geospatial data all the time, but they don't necessarily make the connection to the field of GIS and all the work that makes the magic happen in their phone. So even just telling a school about what this is, that it's not just something you can only use at one grade level, that it's not just something you can only use with one subject, that it's something you can use throughout the entire school, that's a big feat. That's something that needs to be done. So again, don't have to be a GIS whiz. Can you talk about how it's cool and how it could help in a classroom? Demonstrating existing exercises to educators. So not having to reinvent the wheel. There are so many good resources out there, lesson plans and activities, and it's a matter of, showing a teacher that it's there and walking them through it, helping them get comfortable with leading it in their own classroom so that they can carry on and carry the torch themselves. So you don't always have to completely come up with all new things. You're not building necessarily a whole semester's worth of coursework for them to implement. Some people do, maybe they'll ask you to, but often it's just showing them what's already available and being that person they can talk to about it to implement it. Sharing information about careers in geography and GIS. Again, in this room, we're well aware that this is a good field to be in. There are a lot of opportunities. Even labor market statistics say there's a lot of growth opportunities. But how many people heard about be a geographer or be a geoscientist in high school? Yeah, exactly, right? So it's not one of those typical career paths you hear about. at younger stages at K-12, and yet it's a career path that is open to a world of opportunities. This type of technology doesn't really pigeonhole you into one discipline at all, does it? Right? So if you're a person who likes to stay undecided and do all possible things, one, you might end up being a geographer. That's what happened here. But two, if you learn this technology, it doesn't put you on a certain path. There's so many different ways they can apply it. So it's only going to be more and more beneficial to our discipline and to society if we have students more aware of these opportunities at a younger age. And then finally, some people do assist teachers and group leaders with making all new exercises, with coming up with Survey 123 and running out in the field and collecting data in a park of things that are broken and taking it to city council and saying, hey, fix this. That's happened. That's been a group project. But finding new data, collecting data, building story maps, new web apps. So some people do, from the ground up, do entirely new customized things, again, with a teacher or a classroom. It all depends on what they're looking for and what you're interested in and how much you can help them with it. So really, our geomentors do a variety of things. And you can work in person in your local community schools, but this is all about technology, so obviously you can work at a distance, right? You can work with a teacher across the country, and be their point of contact to help them through, answer questions, and that kind of thing. Great, that's what they generally do. What do they actually do? That's really gonna drive home what this program does, what it can do, what you might wanna do if you're involved, how you might wanna work with a geomentor if you're a teacher. So I'm just kind of bringing up some quotes and some little examples. What I've learned from running this program with volunteers is they are so excited sometimes about doing this stuff that they don't tell me about it. So I actually have the problem of people being more into volunteering than reporting. Great problem to have, and if you're only going to focus on one thing, I want you to do that. So I know there's so many more stories out there than even the ones that we have, but I'll just highlight a few today. And these kind of show exactly those kind of general categories of what I said volunteers do. So meeting with juniors and seniors at 2 of our local high schools, discussing with them what a GIS career entails and the choices you have with a GIS career. So just actually going somewhere and telling people what you do every day. Maybe to you, you're already like, I know I do that every day, but to them, it's completely something new they've never heard of and thought, I did not know that was a job, right? Anytime a student kind of hears something like that, you just opened up a whole kind of opportunity and in the real world, I thought, I didn't know that's something you could do, whether or not it's something they're interested in, but even making them aware of these possibilities. So one, you are an expert of what you do every day. So again, if you think you can't be a geomentor, do you know what you do? Yes, okay, can you talk about it? Probably, hopefully, right? And so that's already being a great geomentor. They visited a middle school in Riverside, California. They're learning about earthquakes and architecture, so I'll demonstrate how 3D GIS and ArcGIS Online can be used to model such events. So this is a lot of what it's about. What are you guys already teaching and learning? Okay, hey, so we could visualize this in a different way. Let's just check it out. What do you think? Right, so we're not supplanting curriculum. We're finding out ways that, hey, would you like to see this differently? Would you like to look at this spatially? Would this be of something of interest to your students to learn this topic in a different way? And it's stuff, not just connecting them to what they're learning, but especially if they're learning something applicable to their environment. They're in California, earthquakes and architecture. This is not a foreign thing, far, far away land. This is something they can connect with and imagine how much more this topic might drive home if they see it visualized spatially in this way. My son's school just registered for their account. Principal and IT specialists are both excited, as is his kindergarten teacher. Kindergarten. That's awesome. So this is another big task, is just getting them aware of what it is and, yeah, getting them excited about it, even just a little bit excited compared to the level that we are, or I am, about it. It's a really big, important step, is getting them aware of this, excited, and getting them on board. So that's something that a lot of our geomentors do as well. I'm just going to keep showing this stuff because I love it. So I always share this one. Charlie's probably seen me talk about this so many times. I reached out to my daughter's 4th grade challenge program teacher. I shared a bunch of resources with her and inadvertently caused her to change her entire lesson plan to incorporate GIS. Oops. We don't often want oops moments, right, in our lives, but we want these oops moments where the teacher now, and I think that's part of the program too, is it's not just how the students can get more excited, but the teachers can get more excited about what they're already doing, right? Something maybe they've taught every year, year in, year out, and they're passionate about it, but a new way of teaching it is invigorating for them as much as it is for the students. So. And we didn't force her to change her lessons plans. They were excited to. So that's another important part too. But we want more oops moments, more excitement moments. And this next one is just something about volunteering. I think came through in this quote. I'm about to reach out to my daughter's 6th grade social studies teacher. He's expecting my email. This will be the first time doing anything like this. Pretty scary for me, but I have to get over it. Just like I have to get over public speaking, right? So a big part of this, again, do I know enough to be a geomentor? And, oh, I have to put myself out there. And you do, and it is scary, but I encourage you in the most positive way possible when I say this, get over it. I encourage you to put yourself out there, and again, you'll get so much validation out of this and realizing how much you have to offer, how much the technology knowledge you have can go beyond your daily frame of reference of what you work in, and help students get excited about it. So yes, I probably should not tell a crowd of people to get over it, but I just did, so that happened. And then we just get to see the stories come in, and it's super exciting. Top left there, not everyone uses GIS when they do geometering. That's fine. Wall maps, or even just talking about spatial thinking, right? It doesn't have to be GIS. So with younger kids, we do have geometers who will just go in sometimes with a giant wall map. National Geographic has those huge floor maps of the states that are fantastic. So kids are running around in socks, hopping around on cities and mountain ranges. Bottom left, actually, it's an undergraduate geography society at a university, partners with a local high school, and takes over the classroom for a couple days to teach high schoolers mapping with ArcGIS Online. In the center there, working with the AP GIS class, making custom web maps. Can you imagine getting to do that at the high school level? I started learning GIS when I was 24, and I felt young starting at 24. But when I think of just a different way of thinking and the future of the field and the innovation that will come from students intuitively knowing how to work with this stuff at a younger and younger age, it's exciting. Top right, working with a Girls Innovation Academy. Again, that sounds super cool. I want to go back in time and be in these things. But teaching georeferencing and wetlands mapping. And the bottom one, an example, again, of working at a distance. So Rob Spacecraft, he actually puts that on his name badges at conferences, Spacecraft, as to go by. Fun with names, puns with names. But he virtually mentored students in California who are working on story map submissions for a contest. So wasn't even in the same place, but could go back and forth and advise them, help them find data, and that sort of thing. And I'll just keep sharing more. So this picture, top left of Justin, he's the one who had a paper map with the younger kids, but now you see him teaching, digital mapping with an older crowd, so adapting with the students or with what's available in the classroom, right? You just have to adapt, so this is a very good exercise in adapting. Top right, Annette in Pennsylvania does amazing jobs working with all these different schools and getting just the most adorable, activities of kids going out doing surveying and collecting data in the field. And of course, can you spot the geospatial professional in a sea of fourth graders? I'll give you a moment. And maybe it's because he or she, is really blended in there, or maybe it's because the fourth graders are looking more and more like geospatial professionals. I don't know. I'll leave that as food for thought. And really the other thing is, this also, it's not just one directional of geomentors are out going and doing a thing and students are benefiting. I've really found that everyone kind of benefits, and you don't necessarily predict which way the geomentoring really is going to happen. So I don't know if you see our tiny man, big vest here in the front left, right? That's Oliver, and Oliver is the son of his geomentor dad next to him. And when his geomentor dad goes and does drone exhibits and kind of demonstrations for classrooms, Oliver goes with them and is super jazzed about it. He likes to help, he likes to be the helper. So while I know there's a classroom of students here learning about drones, I think there's a lot of geomentoring here between Oliver and his dad, and we've got a geomentor in training here, and he's learning about what his dad does and what's interesting about this, and he's learning about teaching other students as well. So there's a lot of positive, multi-directional kind of benefits out of these geomentoring opportunities. So maybe I have some of you hooked thinking, maybe I could do that, possibly. So how do you get involved? It's painless, I promise. You just sign up online, and you're not obligated to anything, assigned anything, required anything. You just get in our communication loop. So you'll get emails, you'll get newsletters, and you'll be a dot on the map. So educators and schools can find you and reach out to you. If there are educators in the room and you would like to also put your name out there and saying, hey, I want help, we have a sign up for educators as well. So if you sign up, then geomentors will be notified and they can contact you. And you can say what you're looking for and what kind of help that you want. And once you signed up, and if you're ready at some point, and I will say we ask geomentors to get involved when they can to the extent that they can. Maybe it's a one-time thing, maybe it's an ongoing collaboration, first semester, a year, or beyond. But every little bit helps. So don't think, I only have this much time, so I can't do it, or that kind of thing. We don't have any limitations or anything like that. Again, every little bit helps. Could be the spark for the educator, the spark for the student, the spark for you. So connecting with a collaborator, I will be straightforward. It's not always the easiest to make roads into the K-12 communities. Charlie knows a lot more about that. So sometimes this can be the most challenging thing. As a geomentor, you can first of all see what educators are out there requesting help. We do tend to have more volunteers putting their name on the map than educators. Contact local schools in your area. You can see which schools have signed up for the software and which ones haven't. So that's a strategy of go to schools that have, or approach schools that haven't to tell them about it if you want to do that kind of advocacy angle. You can also work with youth groups because they're also eligible to get free software. So maybe you volunteered with Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or 4-H or Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Those are options too, or after-school clubs affiliated with schools as well. So think outside the box. What are environments that students are in that I could work with? But we really encourage people to work through your social network. Most people have a connection to K-12 in their life. Right? So it's their kid's school, their friend is a teacher, their alma mater, right? So think of it that way. One, it makes it a little bit easier. People know who you are and why you want to help because you're just invested. And you're kind of more invested too because you know who you're helping already. But you could be the person that brings GIS to your elementary school, right? To your middle school, to your high school. Again, a lot of parents who are working with their own kids' teachers, some of them follow them through the grade, so they'll work with the grade level that their child is at, and they're going and adapting, and so they're starting with elementary, and now they're in middle, and they're and adapting their skills as well with doing that. And again, for those who are seeking a GeoMentor, the online map is there, but there's also a database as well, so you can connect and find people that way. And we don't just say, woohoo, sign up. We try and put as much resources as we can in one spot to have more than enough to get you started. So if you go to our website, we have information on how to find people, how to talk to them, also how to connect with each other. We do want this to be a community, so we have online communities, we have social media, how you can share your story, and also review other people's stories as well. And you can gain service and outreach experience, which in and of itself is fulfilling, but some people, particularly undergrads who are looking to have more experience, if you tell us about your story, which we really want you to do, we'll document it and give you a certificate, and anyone who's an aspiring GISP, right, this can work towards your accreditation or your renewal. And I mentioned the case studies. This is how you can really find out more about these variety of experiences. We have over 40 case studies from 27 different states, and these are people who took the time to write a lot about their experience. How did they find someone? How much time did it take? That's something we want to know. What did they teach? What worked well? What didn't work well? And what did they learn from experience? How was it for them? So I encourage you to go online and check those out. And what we really hear is, again, how much our volunteers get out of it. Right? So it's invigorating to have students show enthusiasm what each of us have chosen as a career. Or as Diana said, it encouraged me in my day-to-day work. It reminded me of how fun GIS can be and how it can be applied to almost everything you do daily. I think sometimes we forget that, oh yeah, this is fun, right? Oh yeah, you can use this for a lot more than just what I do in my discipline here. So I think this can actually be really reinvigorating for our volunteers as well. So I encourage you, if you're not signed up, if you'd like to sign up or at least check us out online, reach out to us, Twitter, email, and all that. And I want to thank you again for having me here today, and happy GIS Day.
Right, thank you very much, Candace. So I will remind everyone again that at the end of all of these talks, we will have all the presenters up again so you can ask questions, so we can have more of a full range discussion with everybody. So if you have any questions, don't worry, Candace is sticking around for a while, and we'll be able to answer questions, and we'll be able to have that discussion at this point maybe about 11:30-ish. But for right now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Charlie Fitzpatrick. Charlie has been Esri's schools program manager since 1992, focused on K-12 classroom use in the U.S. He taught social studies in grades 7 through 12, mostly 8th grade geography in St. Paul, Minnesota. So please welcome Charlie Fitzpatrick.
Nobody's asked this so far, so are there any teachers out there? We've got a handful, yay! And there are some of us who have been, who will say, oh, that's one of the best times of our lives. Well, so I have one of the 3 or 4 jobs that Jack Dangerman, the head of Esri, would like to have. And so this is always a big responsibility for me to come in and talk with people about what's available, what's possible, because there's so many things that people are doing. And you look at these pictures and think, wow, everybody's doing stuff. And well, yes and no. And it's important to understand a little bit about why this came to be. So I got to start in the old days, back in 1992, with the dawn of ArcView 1.0. And it was on Windows 3.1, and very few people, very few teachers had access to machines and were comfortable with them and had time to mess around with them, and there was no curriculum. And so ArcView 1 was out, and then came ArcView 2, and by the time that ArcView 3 was around, there were things that people could do, there were some activities, there were some projects, and really it was projects that made it happen for people. Getting people to say, hey, there's a thing that I really want to explore, and that's been the watchword all the way through. Whether it's, I want to take a look at the watershed in my community, or I want to see the world in several different projections, or I have this battle that I really like to think about. There's something that people want to do in their class and have the time and have the passion to do, but it was really the oddball way back then. Then about 2000, things started to roll fast. We came out with this GIS in Schools book with a set of case studies of what people are doing and some best practices. And 2002 was a real watershed because we came out with this big green book, Mapping Our World, and that was a curriculum where there was the software in place and there were activities for world geography that people could go through, and they were doing it from 3rd and 4th grade on up into grad school, using that one resource. And they've been doing that over the years with ArcView 3, and then ArcView 9, and then ArcView 10, and then ArcGIS Online. That resource has been fairly timeless. But what also happened back in 2000 was that kids started appearing up on the Esri user conference stage. And you can see in the top left, there's a group that is sitting on top of this thing called the Geography Network, which was starting to get to be online capacity. And they were actually some of the first users of the Geography Network. They were working with some data from online. So this was something that was, presaging the big change that was coming. The group in the top right, they look like little munchkins. They were 4th graders who came up on stage and were able to prove to people what it is that kids can do, because these guys said, hey, Department of Natural Resources, your model about what these toads, what these tiny little horny toads in central Washington, that they only travel 1,000 feet in their life, but the ones that we're tracking, they've traveled 3-4 times that much. So your models are wrong, so go fix them. And so that was really important for people to get to see that students can do a lot. So then came these, the swirl that you see in the center came out with the Mapping Our World book, and it was a powerful thing for people to see that this is what GIS people do. This is this geographic inquiry process that they go through, and a lot of people who were science teachers will look at this and say, well, of course, everybody's doing this. No, not everybody was doing this. And certainly not so much social studies teacher. I was a social studies teacher, but I grew up as a biologist, and so it's that science thing that helps people see I need to be approaching these things scientifically. I always wanted my kids to be exploring and messing with data, and that's what you got to do with these tools. Well, and that's what happened with some of the materials, the software that started coming out for integrating both desktop data and online data. So you can see in the far right, Arc Explorer Java Edition for Education that came out in 2007, and then ArcGIS Explorer, and then, okay, come on, you can scroll down here. Let's see, let me smallerize this one more notch here. All right, then we can get to, how about if I move the mouse over here? All right, well, we'll just deal with that. ArcGIS Explorer, and then the ArcGIS Online came out, and then some apps working with ArcGIS Online. So things are really starting to happen at the end of the 2010, 2011 year. And in 2012, my God, the world just exploded. ArcGIS Online organizations came out, and people finally in schools had a way to have students be able to safely and securely be able to share and collaborate and work across activities, across classrooms with each other. There were all kinds of ways that they could do this. And Jack ran into Will.i.am, who introduced him to this school, and he said, I think we want to work with this school. And what they were able to do, they had two fabulous teachers who were at this math, science, technology magnet academy. It was the social studies teacher and the English teacher who took GIS and ran with it because they converted what was already a great project, a research project, into a really powerful thing. And in 3 months, they went from, okay, we now have computers that we can turn on, to, Jack, this is the group that needs to be up on stage. When you have teachers that are really good teachers and you expose them to GIS, powerful things happen. And so they came on to the stage, they showed people what was possible, and that was about the time when President Obama was saying, hey, we want private industry to help education. Jack heard that and said, okay, we're going to do that. As Candace was talking about, we're going to do that. We're going to provide software to any school that wants it. We're going to provide mentors, we're going to provide instructional materials, and we're going to provide some teacher support. So we're going to make that stuff happen. And that was this ConnectEd program that started out in, Esri jumped in in 2014, and the biggest thing that we jumped into was working with GeoInquiries. One of my colleagues, Tom Baker, said, okay, we've got to come up with materials that Joe teacher, Jane teacher, without GIS background can incorporate into their class, into work that they're already doing. So he has, over the last couple of years, built with teachers helping him out, built in these 9 sets of 15 to 20 lessons for anybody to use with no GIS background. So how do they work? Well, what happens is there is a 2-page back-to-front PDF for every lesson. That 2-page PDF includes a colored bar on the first page where it's got a URL to its own unique pre-constructed map. So all of these lessons, 150 lessons that lead to content that is the stuff that teachers are doing in their standard, regular classroom activities. They're working on standard content. So it's Edgar Allan Poe, it's the Civil War, or it's earthquakes and plate tectonics and watersheds and linear rates of development and whatever it happens to be. Oh, and there's an elementary that is an integrated set of content as well. Teachers can do this with very little background, and it'll work even just in one computer in a classroom with a projector. But if you have students that have devices, all the better. And so this has been extremely powerful because no login is required. They can do this in 15 minutes, or if they decide to, oh, hey, we want to mess around with the software, it may take a little bit longer, but it's all good. Now, what has come of that? You introduce people to some of these GeoInquiries where they get to do these activities, and they say, great, I want more. Where's more? Well, a level 2. So we've been creating these level 2 GeoInquiries that say, now we want you to get into doing some analysis. To do that, you actually have to log in with an organization account and be able to have publishing capacity. But when you can do that, you can do geographic analysis. So this particular lesson, this Dust Bowl, is looking at, it's a summarize within activity where you're going in and taking a look at how many are within this zone. And so there are all kinds of analytical capacities that are built into ArcGIS Online. And what's happening is the teachers are starting to get exposed to this and discovering, wow, this is pretty powerful, this is pretty cool. And those organizations are available at no cost to any school in the country. And that's what a lot of schools are doing. So then what you see is a couple of different examples here. So in the bottom right, let's start with that one. Here you see an AP Human Geography class that is happening in 2 schools at once with 1 teacher. That is a virtual situation in the other school. So you can see the other school in the left-hand monitor, and you can see the presentation that he's walking his students through in 2 schools at once, just with the big monitor. That's very doable, even if you don't have a really big monitor like that. This was a very cool classroom. I loved this. And you can see, actually, if you get in and take a look at it, the students all have devices on their machines. So he's walked them through some things, and now he's saying, okay, here's what I want you to explore. So now in 3 different classrooms, in these other pictures, you're seeing students, and they're all working on iPads here. The fellow with the broken arm in the top left corner, he's actually got the teacher material that he's been working with. And this teacher said, hey, I like my science kids to be working with the actual content that I get to see. I want them to go through the exact steps, and we interrupt them every now and then. And so he was very good, skilled at doing that. The student below, in the lower left, he's working on a social studies one, looking at the Middle East with a worksheet from the teacher that the teacher has specially created and said, you know, go through these activities and work your way through it. And the student in the top right has no worksheet at all. That student in that class, they're going through and saying, hey, this is what we want you to explore. You got 10 minutes to get in and explore and tell me what you found afterwards. And so there are a lot of different ways of working with these things, teaching standard content. So that's been very helpful, and people get to the end of that and they say, great, I want more. Where do I go? So people inside Esri and beyond have been building these materials. There's a book that came out, the ArcGIS book. And what that says is it provides people a number of activities that they can go through. Well, they've added to that some lessons that they also said, hey, let's open it up and bring some lessons that are just designed for teachers. And so there are 3 different types of lessons. And one of the mentors said, my God, the kids are just downloading the book or the lesson onto their phone, and they're doing it on the computers, and they love it. They're focused. They're so into it, which is great. That's what we want people to do. And one of the best examples of that is happening in Virginia, where the Virginia Geospatial Semester, which is a program that is coordinated by James Madison University, is running through, and they've got about 500 students this year that are going through that, mostly 12th graders. There are a few 11th graders going through it. Science, social studies, and some CTE teachers. But that's not the only way to do that. There are also people, as the congressman was talking about, the East Initiative. So these folks are working through in Arkansas. There are 250 schools in Arkansas that are participating in this program. It is a project-based, high-tech, individualized service learning project. And so people are going through and learning GIS. High schools, most high schools in Arkansas, many middle schools, and a few even elementary schools, kids are doing GIS. And so you can see some map-based activities and the example on the website, but a lot of students are going through and just exploring it. The 2 kids that are over here on the left, Munchkins again, 4th graders who were up on stage in 2014 doing something, and they showed it, and this kid's saying, well, hey, we took our balloon data, and let's display it in 3D, and let's make a movie of it. And people came up to me afterwards and said, the students are doing things that we don't do. So once again, yep, you can do it if you just get the chance to do it. And in Michigan, the GRACE program was a very powerful thing that said, we want to start with the teachers learning about this through geo-inquiries. mentor them to go beyond that, maybe inspire the teachers to get the students to do some additional training, and then the savvy kids can qualify for internships. And they had about 150 or 200 kids over the last couple of years get summer internships, paid summer internships with what they're doing. And there's a little town in Michigan where there is a kid who is working through his 12th grade year, and he will graduate with 3 years in the county GIS shop at the time that the only GIS user in the county is retiring. He may not have to go to college. But as Candace mentioned, clubs are available too. They're doing all kinds of cool things. Here we got the 4-H group that is showing some of their health programs in the background. And over on the left-hand side in 2017, 4-Hers were up on stage looking at, because they had an interstate health program that they were looking at, 4 states that they were collaborating on this research project and putting it together. This is a fabulous presentation, getting people to see what's possible with that work. So we've taken that and said, okay, what we want to do is, let me smallerize this just a little bit, see if we can wrap that up. Ooh, there, you get to see actually the winners from this past year. The middle school and high school winners, there's a competition that says put together in a team of 1 or 2 a research project and put together a story map. So you can go, let me just hit that one again so that you can see, then I'll give you the address if you like. And the big national prize across the country is you get to come to the user conference, which is always great for students who haven't ever been on a plane. But you get to see all of their maps. Now, it's not just for students. We've also got an opportunity for people to see what other teachers are doing. So we've created a little challenge program for the teachers. Put together a 1-minute video, take a look at it. We're going to look across the country at the ones that we really want to highlight and say, here, these are the ones that people should take a look at. And so you're seeing science teachers, social studies teachers, CTE teachers at all different grade levels and the things that they're doing. It's a very powerful way to explore this. And there are some of the teachers that are putting out independent materials on their own for people to work with. So there are lots of opportunities for people to think about where do we fit this stuff in. And what you're seeing now is the map that shows that there are thousands of schools across the country that are already doing this, and thousands more who haven't gotten into doing this because they've only been exploring the geo-inquiries. And so you can go in and explore this. Esri.com/schools will take you to all the information that you can shake a stick at, all the information that you really need. You can get software for the schools in your neighborhood, and there are things that your kids can do just starting in, all grades. Well, Candace and I could probably talk all the rest of the day, but you've got more people to present. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlie. All right, moving along, our next speaker is Kathleen McGuigan. She is an education resource specialist here at the Library of Congress with over 25 years experience working on behalf of K-12 education for national groups. In her current role, she is responsible for building online teacher programs here at the library. So please welcome Kathleen McGuigan.
Good morning. My name's Kathy McGuigan, and I work in the Learning and Innovation team, and we're part of a new center here at the library, which is called the Center for Learning, Literacy, and Engagement. And I do have the pleasure of building teacher programs and products for educators using libraries' collections, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today, a project that we started last summer looking at literary maps. Excuse me. So what we're looking at are some of the foundational steps that we're taking to visualize the library's catalog and we're really focusing on American literature, and I'll go into a little bit more of the specifics. But I was very excited to hear from our past two speakers about the mentoring aspect to this and the access that schools will have. Because really what I'm talking to, the audience I'm talking to today really are the educators in the crowd, and talking about how I'm approaching this project from the educator perspective. So, what is a literary map? A literary map is a map, or it's a picture that acknowledges the contributions of authors to a specific area or region. It can also be a map or a picture of locations of works within fiction. So I want to show you a couple of examples of some literary maps that we have here in the collection at the Library of Congress in our Geography and Maps division. So this map is the pictorial chart of American literature from 1932. And this is a book lover's map of the United States from 1949. Next up is the Iowa literary map from 1934 from the Davenport Library. And here we have the Texas literary map of 1955, and this comes from the Dallas Public Library. And lastly, in terms of our examples, this is the Maine Writers map, and this comes from the Maine Council of Teachers of English, and this is from 1981. So in approaching this project, there was in 1993, there was an exhibition here at the Library of Congress called Language of the Land, Journey into Literary America, where these literary maps that the library houses were put on to display. And this exhibition went on the road and traveled to 16 states and 20 different sites. And as part of their programming, State Centers for the Book, and I'll get into what a State Center for the Book is, they started producing literary maps. And then those maps, as well as other maps from the collections, are in this particular book, which is called the same as the exhibition, Language of the Land, Journeys into Literary America. This was published in 1999. And so when I learned about the literary maps here at the Library of Congress, it's something that has really stuck in my head since I've been here for 11 years. And a long time ago, I was an English teacher, right? And so I was thinking about how you could use these instructionally with your students, but beyond that, in looking at some of the maps, right, figuring out the folks who selected the authors that are displayed on this map may look very different to your students in terms of building their own literary map and celebrating different facets of their literary history. So last year, I had the pleasure of working for the Center for the Book, which is also in this Center for Learning, Literacy, and Engagement. And as part of that work, the state centers, we have a state center for the book in all 50 states, and they are about reading promotion, literacy promotion, and celebrating poetry. So taking some pieces of the programming that the library does on behalf of constituents and rolls them out through the state. And so several states had mentioned that they were looking at using GIS to do their literary maps. And so what we decided to do was to form a committee, right? That's what you do. So we formed a committee with several of the states who were already in this field looking at this project and how you take your literary map from a paper product and map that out using GIS. So we're working with the state of Illinois, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, Washington, Minnesota, and Montana. And so I just want to show you a quick example. This is a project from Montana and the Montana Authors Project. And really what they did is just mapped out the books that they selected from their physical literary map and mapped it out using GIS. This is another project. This is the Washington State Center for the Book, and this is called Finding Books in Washington. And so they were looking at it from an end user's perspective. How do they serve their constituents in getting access to books? So they've mapped out the public, academic, and tribal libraries, as well as independent bookstores throughout the state. And then the last example I want to show here is the Illinois Center for the Book. They have a very robust database that they maintain, which is called the Illinois Writers Project. And not only does the state center nominate writers to be in the Illinois Writers Project, but writers themselves can self-select and nominate themselves for the Writers Project. So you can see this is a very dense project. So one of the things that we did in meeting with the groups is to really map out one of the paper maps and map it out on the Esri platform. And so here you can see a side-by-side comparison. I'm not sure how big this is actually showing up, but this is the Arizona literary map, and it is then laid out for looking at the catalog records that we have here at the library. And it was just the start of what I'm going to be talking about and mapping this out. So, I know you all know this, but I just want to talk about the benefits of doing something like this, is that we can talk about exact geographic location. And this becomes more accessible to a larger audience. Again, if you take one of those physical maps, a literary map, students might not recognize themselves within those writers, within that particular area. And if you put it into the hands of the students to determine what facets they would use to lay out their own map, you know, in using the Esri platform and GIS in particular, it's a matter of easily editing the information. And most importantly, you can incorporate large amounts of data. So, and I'll get into a little bit more of what we're looking at here. And it serves as an intuitive educational tool, as our last two speakers have talked to you about. So, looking at the library's records, in 2017, the library released 25 million records of their catalog. And as part of that release, what they did was they also sponsored a hackathon where they invited groups in and at their sites to start taking a look at the data. And so there was a lot of great work that was done in terms of being able to look at what is needed to extract the data within those sets. And we know within the MARC record, so what is a MARC record? For those who are not familiar, it's a machine-readable cataloging record. So it's the basis of the collections here at the library. And within the fields, and I'm not a librarian, so for the librarians in the crowd, I just want to put that out there. So, but there is a field within the MARC records, which is 651, and that is a field that locates the where the work takes place. So, if we were to look at all the geographical information within a MARC record, you would have the place where books are published. That is actually in the MARC record. But you would see a great influx if you were taking a look at American fictional records with that in New York. So what we're really trying to take a look at is where does the work of fiction take place? And that happens within these MARC tags, and in particular in field 651. So this is the MARC record for one of the most popular novels that's taught in schools, which is The Great Gatsby, right? And so taking a look at the MARC record for the Great Gatsby, we get to field 651, and as you would expect, it says Long Island, New York. So taking that one step further, mapping it out, this is transcribing the MARC record and putting it into the map. So in talking about how do we move forward with this project, and again, when you start looking at the amount of data that is out there with the 25 million records, how do you start making sense of this? And so there are so many smart people here at the library, and several of them are in the room, and I want to thank you all for helping me with this project. So I sat down and talked with a number of experts within the library, and someone made the suggestion you should get a junior fellow. This is an intern that comes and spends 6 or 7 weeks with us here at the library. And just invite this person in to start taking a look at what they did in the hackathon, and look at what your committee is trying to, what their goals are, and let's play around a little bit. So we put the call out, and thankfully we got. He's now a senior at the University of Georgia, majoring in GIS and comparative literature, and his name is Josh Clifford. And you will hear from him in the future, I'm sure, but he couldn't be here today. So he came on board, and we essentially gave him the project and said, good luck. And so one of the first things that he did was to take a look at all of the data sets, and focus in on one of the parts. So those 25 million records are in 41 different parts. And so we narrowed that 41 parts down to part 41. And so what he did is started editing the data within that using a tool called MARC Edit. And then he refined this. For those GIS professionals in the room, you know far better than I do how much time it takes to really get into the data sets and make sure that they are consistent. And then translated them and cleaned up the records, and then finally mapped them out. So we did not get anywhere near mapping out the American fictional records, but I will share with you what we were able to do. So the part 41 that he was taking a look at had 250,000 records. And so the processing power that you need to even start refining the data in this is pretty intense. And he, as I mentioned before, he used MARC Edit to look at that. And then he moved that from MARC Edit into Open Refine. And doing these steps was just to assess how many records had data in field 651, because it is not complete at all whatsoever. And more recent records may have that data the way we want to ingest it, but older records in some cases will not have that. So then he brought it into Excel, and we started to focus on Washington State. It was a manageable piece of information that we could do in the 6 to 7 weeks that he was here in Washington. And so we focused on the state of Washington and identified where we could find information. In a lot of cases, you'll see just Washington labeled and not a specific area within Washington. So what he did is then he took the data and laid it out, where we had Washington identified. And his key here is this particular area. This has 192 records because it's just Washington. And then the other areas around the state where the actual list is, where the actual city is listed out. So this is the translation, and looking at the title, the author, the year published, the geographic ID, And then he went into another platform and extracted the book cover so that it can provide some kind of visualization with the information. So what did we learn after the summer is that processing that has to happen with the 41 parts, we need a lot more interns, and a lot of them. So I was actually very excited to hear about the access that schools may have in terms of being able to start looking at data sets. But we also need a better understanding of the MARC records and the cataloging language that is used within the 651 fields. And then we're also looking at the commercial databases that are out there. As I mentioned, Josh would go to Amazon and actually get the jacket covers to be able to make the project more appealing visually. It isn't completely necessary, but really figuring out what databases exist, because we're looking at it from the geographic location within the work of fiction, but there are other databases out there that we need to incorporate their information. So going back to that Illinois Writers Project, there's a lot of great data that they have that would inform this particular project. So trying to take a look at the data sets that already exist within the field. So some of the ones that we're looking at are Amazon, Overdrive, Goodreads, which is also Amazon, Barnes & Noble, in terms of databases that exist, and what would be involved with merging and sharing that data. So some of the next steps that we are taking, we will have another junior fellow here this summer, and this junior fellow most likely will come from, will be a graduate student in library information sciences. We'd really love to get into the cataloging aspect to the project. And again, I'm mentioning we will be examining some of the other databases. And we'll start meeting with other potential end users. Again, we have the state centers, which is one of the driving forces for this project in particular, but thinking about the students that you work with and the folks who would be able to implement making their own map using the robust data that we could provide. And we're thinking at this juncture, I'm not making any promises, I'm not even asking permission, but we're thinking about crowdsourcing. There's a project that was done with the DC Public Library that started in 2012, where librarians were invited into their database to pull out passages of books that took place in different neighborhoods in Washington, DC, and they were able to map that out. It started in earnest in 2012. I think it's not as updated as it was in the beginning of the project, but they opened it up to library and librarian professionals to mark those records for their needs. And so we're trying to take a look at what does crowdsourcing with this look like, and what kind of information potentially we could get back versus, again, the information that becomes very important for the library in terms of its cataloging and cataloging records. So that's a little bit of what we're looking at. But again, for the educators in the crowd, I want you to be aware that we're really looking at it from your perspective and how you might be able to use this with your students and be able to really visualize American literature. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Kathleen. So at this point, I'd like to invite all our speakers from this morning up onto the stage. What we'll do is we'll have our speakers standing up here. Any sort of questions you have, you can field to the whole group. The only one thing we will be doing is repeating the question back into the microphone so that our video picks it up. But aside from that, feel free to ask any questions of the folks up here. We're going to have an open discussion. So thank you.
And don't be shy. Okay, we better have a pointer.
All right, perfect.
I'll start. Hi. Some of you already know me, Ed Robeck from the American Geosciences Institute. Candace, I'm going to direct this to you, although I'd be happy to hear from any of you. With the work that you've been doing in schools through GeoMentors, one of the things that comes to my mind is how GIS can also bring students into science and geography and things that maybe wouldn't have thought about it before. You addressed that a little bit through the careers angle, but I wonder if you're seeing, even anecdotally, or if you're actually studying the role that this can play in diversifying the geosciences and geography.
Absolutely. Do you want me to repeat the question? Okay, so the question, generally speaking, is how we're seeing GIS as diversifying people coming into the geospatial industry and applications of it. You saw the one tweet, for example, of working with the Girls Innovation Academy, right? So I guess there's two ways I look at this in terms of how it's improving the diversity of use of GIS and also the diversity of users of GIS. So one, you know, it's the challenge, and there's even discussion, right, of the different levels of spatial thinking skills based on sex, right, girls versus boys, and so even in the types of toys they use. We heard that this morning. So when you bring this into the classroom and exposing everyone using this spatial thinking, I think there is a great potential, and there is a great potential of having more females interested in STEM fields and using this technology that maybe didn't have access to it before. And you do have people going and working just with Girl Scouts, right? Just with Boy Scouts, with 4-H, with people who maybe didn't have access to this in their typical classrooms before. But also, we're reaching more students, and people are getting more understanding of different uses of GIS because it's being used, again, not just in geography classrooms, because there aren't actually a lot of those, unfortunately, right? But it's being used in history classrooms, it's being used in environmental science, it's being used in literature, as we've seen. So it's our way of sneaking spatial thinking into all these topics. It's already there, like it's already inherently part of the discipline in these topics, but you don't think of maybe typically in a literature class, let's do some online mapping. What? Aren't we going to just talk about metaphors and symbology? No, you know, or even in music or history, even though it's so spatially grounded and located. So the idea that technology just doesn't belong in an engineering classroom, and it doesn't just belong with people interested in a certain career track, right? We can use it in all these different ways, all these different subjects with all different types of students. So I hope that addresses your question. But yes, we very much hope that we're contributing to that through this program and through Esri's donation, and more students simply getting involved in this at all different ways. So, thanks.
As a follow-up, have you looked at that at all systematically in terms of the populations that you're serving through GeoMentors?
So as I mentioned in my presentation, reporting from our volunteers is really difficult to get. Again, they're excited to go do stuff, but they don't often tell us about it. They'll tell us about it a year later. And we don't push too hard to systematically try and plug our volunteers for a lot of data and feedback, because our focus is really on them having the energy and focusing on the outreach component, because it really is an outreach program. But I do see our community as there is this great potential to get involved with them and learn from them and get more information about the engagements they've done. We've done that more with the case study, so about 40 of those that are online where people are talking about how many students they've worked with and what did or didn't work, what was challenging about the environment, the constrictions of time or curriculum or that kind of thing, and feedback, individual feedback from students, you know, stories anecdotally of students who have taken off, who've gone and gotten an internship or have said, I'm majoring this now, or now they're working with the county GIS department or something like that. So because it's been an outreach program, we haven't had that angle of it. I'd love to, and I think the potential is there because we have all these volunteers to tap that kind of information from. But yeah, it's a great idea. Yep.
If I can just add a little bit to one of those points, in the question about students' engagement, there are a number of students that have been tempted to leave school, whose parents have said, my child is coming to school because they get to be a part of this class and they get to do GIS. There are a number of people who have said, this parent, teachers have talked with me and said, this parent came up and said, this child is staying in school in order to take this class, or this student now has something to look forward to, a way to feel good about school. And so there are a number of students who have been feeling success in ways that they've not been able to experience in 5 or 10 years. There are a number of students also who are in various ways special needs students who have found tremendous success working with GIS. So there's a lot of ways of thinking about how some of these additional exposures can influence people's lives.
Hi, my name is Nanette Gibbs. I'm with the Science, Technology, and Business Division here, and I'm a business specialist, and I write on technology and business and applications, artificial intelligence, drone technology. But I also was a former teacher, and I applaud your efforts to reach out. I was an IB teacher, which gave me the unique experience and opportunity to teach across the curriculum and work with my colleagues. However, that is not the case in the majority of the schools. And we all know state standards and teachers who have to teach to these tests every year. And I was curious, do you have any statistics that divide the schools, whether they have special programs within public schools, such as the IB program, the AP program, and how many public schools, in fact, can embrace your program? And, or are you addressing state standards and trying to get this as a state standard?
So standards, models, how are we, and I'll speak for Esri on this, addressing the notion of meeting standards, helping people cope with the ultimate flexible tool and less flexible environmental or educational environment. The short answer is we are a GIS company, not an education company. And so as broadly applicable as GIS is, as powerful as it is, we've said we can't possibly meet the 2.5 of us on the K-12 team, can't possibly meet the needs of the 50 million students across the country. What we're trying to do is to help educators recognize that they can use tools in a lot of different ways. We have any number of situations where a really good teacher working with GIS in this department is across the hall from a teacher in the same department who will not use GIS because the second teacher says he or she needs to focus on the standards, even though the first teacher says, I'm using it to meet the standards. And so there are all kinds of situations that we run into where, as the congressman was talking about, standards are important, standards are helpful, that's why we have so darn many of them, and it's always a challenge to know which ones you're going to meet. There are a number of people who say we can't look at geo-inquiries if they don't have our state. We can't even look at the document if it doesn't have our state on it. If it has a national standard, we can't use it. We can't. So it's really a challenge for the educational environment. One of the biggest pieces that we have started to notice is a number of people who are saying, we're feeling empowered to be creative in the ways that we meet standards because there is no one way to meet them, and GIS will adapt to do that.
Oh, boy.
question was, and I'm going to repeat it for everyone, was has the library, as an enterprise, I'm going to use that term as an enterprise because I think it's a lot easier than to just say the geography and map division. Has the library itself made a commitment to offering these type of data sets and or education for the public? Short answer is not yet. Long answer is where we want to be. I think those of you, especially, I know the two mics in the bush, as John referred to them earlier, and the BBs, all know that we had to build the architecture first. And we talked a little bit about the geospatial hosting environment earlier. The architecture had to come first, but I think back to the point, and I think that both Candace and Charlie made, and this is where I'm going to tie it back to my speakers, is they talked about giving the software to people, but giving the software to people is not enough. Candace talked about geomentoring, where you actually have people coming in, even if it's just being an advocate for using the software or exploring the possibilities of what this software can do for you. I think Charlie talked a little bit more about a more systematic program where they actually built lesson plans. They got people excited about doing these activities, so they wanted to go on to the next phase, the next phase, and the next phase. So I think there's a lot of planning before you can go to that step, and I think love to be part of it. I don't think we're there right now.
And I'll put on my hat in working with the teachers. I would say that what we try and do with our team is to show the resources that the library has in its collections and look at some of the educational uses within those collections. So if an initiative comes out from the library, just recently, as a matter of fact, I think it was October 24th, was the crowds.loc.gov, which is a crowdsourcing project and looking at transcribing data from the handwritten document and actually laying that out. And so what we do is work with educators throughout the country and showing them the resource itself, how they implement it, and I think you got to that really well, which is it's up to the teachers to be able to see the educational value. We can't script it, we can't prescribe it, but we do show them the resources that are available to them. And I want to go back to the one question about standards too. And looking at the standards. The American Association of School Librarians just released new informational literacy standards, and it's up to states whether to incorporate that in different curricula around the country. But there are advocates out there who are looking at how you can look at these types of literacy. AASL is definitely a thought partner in that. National Science Teachers Association is another partner. They have the next generation science standards, as well as ISTE is the International Society for Technology and Education. So there is that conversation where the confluence of that meets. It definitely comes down to, in a lot of ways, comes down to the individual states and then rolling out through the districts. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But we do work with those groups too, and taking a look at what those standards are so that we can add that to our vocabulary in terms of working with educators throughout the country.
Hi, my name is Ariel Siegel. I'm a digital conversion technician here, and I was very interested to hear about all stimulating approaches in digital humanities. I actually did a GIS type project for the capstone of my digital curation course that I was taking, where I used a very easy application called Time Mapper to
of course, we live in a country where state standards are set, at the state and local level, and the federal government can really only have an influence by making the states follow the money. And even though geography has always been a core academic subject, it never had any associated funding authorizations with it. But that changed in 2015 when Congress passed the Every Student Succeeds Act and President Obama signed it into law. For the first time, there are 2 dedicated authorizations in federal K-12 law dealing with geography education. And so hopefully, if Congress redoes the K-12 law again and those authorizations are strengthened or the money amounts are even increased, it's an opportunity for geography to make more inroads in what we're doing in K-12 instruction around the country. So, we need to tell our local educators the stories about what, GIS can do for students, for spatial thinking. And, we need to also work with folks, across the street here. So when they do reauthorize the K-12 law again, and it's supposed to potentially be considered next year, they need to think about the importance of, what geography means for workforce development. So it's a multi-pronged approach, and it's something that's evolving and something we can really make an impact on.
Questions on that? Yes.
I feel very blasphemous asking this question, but I'm curious to know, are there other GIS tools that, that schools are using outside of Esri that you've come across in your work or talking with educators, or ones that you use? I'm sorry, I love Esri and ArcGIS Online. I know you're the big player in the field, but I'm just curious what else is going on out there outside of Esri?
Sure. So obviously, we have a great partnership with Esri, and that uniform software donation really is the launching pad and what most people use. But, and Esri, I believe, and Charlie agrees with it, the concept of GeoMentor is bigger than that, right? It's about promoting geography, spatial thinking, and getting more students on board and exposed to that any way, shape, or form. So we also do encourage our volunteers to use what they know best as well, what maybe classrooms already are using and what there's interest in. So it can be open source, it can be QGIS. So many apps, of course, as well. So Mapillary, people are doing, and people are using Mapbox products and Leaflet. I mean, we encourage anything and everything, because it's all about getting kids mapping, right? It's getting kids thinking spatially. So we're not just promoting ArcGIS, we're promoting the bigger concept, and Esri's very forward thinking and thinking that too. So yeah, definitely, there are a lot of other things being implemented. Mm-hmm.
I'll jump in on that also, just to say that the questions that we get from people are, there are people on the Macintosh platform who want to do desktop GIS, and that's not doable with Esri technology, except under virtualization. And so there are a number of people that we have seen, less than 10 schools that have talked with me about can they integrate stuff that they do with QGIS. There are a number of people who are working with Google as a way of getting started, and we're comfortable with whatever it is that people want to do. What we generally, as Candace was mentioning, what we generally find that people are looking for is a package of resources and a variety of opportunities. And so given that people have access to, in a school bundle, ArcGIS Online, Community Analyst, ArcGIS Desktop, ArcMap, the suite of apps, Survey 123 and Collector are the most commonly used ones, but additional kinds of apps with the ArcGIS environment, and they can do it for free, has been sufficient for most people.
I would follow up, and I'm going to ask to see you, Kathy. When because you work mostly in higher education, when the students came in, what kind of experience did they have with GIS software?
Yeah, so in higher education, they're coming in with sometimes little and sometimes more experience. I think the higher education market is pretty well entrenched with Esri. But there's a lot of people in the higher education arena that are doing a lot of coding, and so they're doing, you know, modifications and all sorts of things. So there's a lot of Esri in higher ed, but there's other open source apps being developed as well. So.
Any other questions? I have a comment. I'm an English major who's swerving into GIS late in life, and there's an acronym from Washington, there's a ton of acronyms that I haven't heard recently. About 10 years ago, and it struck me when you were talking about Field 651 on the record, and also the fact that as a nation, maybe our cultural output is strongest in the arena of movies. Really well known for that. They used to say STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts. Right? So we're, maybe that used to say then, or maybe I just haven't heard it in a few years. It's still out there.
So, okay, so there's a lot of there's a lot of arts, there's a lot of humanities that are working with geospatial technologies. A large swath of scholars in the humanities, history, archaeology, literature, that are using GIS, either Esri or any other resource to really understand their topic better. So there's definitely the STEAM, the humanities, everything, there's a lot going on. So I encourage everyone to think broadly. Today we were talking STEM, that's kind of how it was presented, but there's definitely a lot of other topics. So.
I was just going to say, I mean, one of the things that we've always been looking at it from the STEAM perspective here at the Library of Congress, but one of the things that I keep hearing now is the digital humanities, and it seems to be that is what the field is moving towards, at least in the K-12. I mean, STEM has been out there for a very long time, and then STEAM came in, you know, at least from the K-12 area, and now you hear a lot about the digital humanities, and you are absolutely right. DC has a lot of a lot of code words, yeah.
And I'll add to that one of the things that happened is that with the rise of story maps, we had, prior to that point, we had a hard time getting English teachers in particular engaged with GIS. But as soon as story maps came out, English teachers started paying attention and asking us questions, and what was happening even more is that the science and the social studies teachers were saying, my God, our kids really need to have better communication skills. How do we engage that? Who do we turn to? And I was like, hello, have you met your neighbors? Getting people to engage with the others in the disciplines. This is where we really try to get people to recognize that with GIS, you're going to be covering everything, and so, you know, embrace it, enjoy it, and do it all day, every day.
Anything else?
How about a round of applause for our speakers today? Thank you so much to our speakers today, including Congressman Bruce Westerman, our keynote this morning. Again, we've had such a nice collection of talks this morning. I hope you all enjoyed it. Talking about GIS in education, here at the Library of Congress and at other institutions. So just a couple things to wrap up our morning session. First off, coming off of what Charlie had mentioned about story maps. So the Library of Congress, if you have not heard yet, has been making our own story maps for a little while. So that sort of represents one of our currently frontward-facing applications of GIS technology and getting into web applications. So in case you haven't heard of it before and want to check them out, if you go to loc.gov/storymaps, we have about 7 or 8 published so far, and this represents different projects that have been implemented from subject matter experts from across the library, so Prints and Photographs Division, Geography and Map Division, and plenty of other divisions across the library that are showcasing different collections of the library and using interactive maps to tell that story. So not only do you have the interactive maps that sort of dive you into the data surrounding that collection, but there are also collection items like photos and maps that, or static maps that illustrate those collections. So, and they really bring them to life. So I think that they're really, really fascinating items, and you should definitely check them out. It's loc.gov/storymaps. And so aside from that, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate you guys joining us this morning and learning about GIS and sort of celebrating GIS Day with us. So thank you very much.